Hello, I'm Jayne Avery, but you can call me Granny Jane. And I'm going to read you a book that I wrote quite some time ago, but it's called TG and the Rainbow Warriors, and I hope you enjoy it. And this is the prologue. In another dimension, not so far from here, the crystal lady is fading away. She beckons to Sky, the leader of her rainbow warriors, the faithful guardians of phytopower. Quickly come here, I've found him, I've found the boy who can save me. Full of expectation, Sky rushes over to her. She is sitting at the edge of an ornately carved crystal fountain, staring into the rainbow mist rising from it. Together they peer into the depths as it parts to reveal a crystal pool. There he is! Look! Granny Genome has been watching him for some time. He's just perfect. Sky frowns as he stares into the crystal water and gets a good look at the small boy. Are you sure you can't put your life and the fate of the world in his hands? Look at him! He's bound to fail. Sky, shame on you! You should have more faith. Granny Genome is an excellent judge of character. I trust her. Yes, I'm sure he is the one. They continue to watch as the drama below unfolds. This is chapter 1. It's not fair. Hey, Goldilocks, where's your teddy bear? Sneered hateful Henry as he spitefully scribbled on the work TG had been struggling with for the past half an hour. He ruffled TG's curly blonde hair and flicked his pencil on the floor. Other children sitting nearby giggled. Hateful Henry sat back down, a mean smile spreading across his pudgy face. As TG looked back at him, Henry stuck out his tongue and screwed up his face. More giggles. Tears crept their way into TG's big blue eyes. Henry was always making fun of him, and TG always lost his temper. He just couldn't help it. How TG hated school. He found it hard to concentrate and was often in trouble for not finishing his work. Even worse, he was in the fact that he was frequently ill, so he had to have lots of time off. He wasn't good at games and was never picked for teams. Now he could feel the back of his throat burning and his head was starting to ache. Oh no, not another cold. Mrs. Cherry, one of the teachers at Do Well Primary School, often stopped to talk to TG. She was the only one who seemed to understand how he felt. It was such a pity she wasn't his teacher. He might not get into so much trouble if she was. Once he'd even dared to tell her about his big ambition to be a chef, but had sworn her to secrecy. She thought it was a brilliant idea. She said fruits and all sorts of vegetable were her favourites, and TG had replied that he hated them and never ate them. Mrs. Cherry had been very surprised and asked him if he'd ever thought that eating more healthily might help his temper. Stupid idea. Even more daft was her suggestion that he give up drinking fizzy drinks. He had laughed out loud at Mrs. Cherry when she'd suggested it. TG always had at least one fizzy drink at break, another one at lunchtime, and probably another couple during the evening after school if he could. His mum tried to stop him, but not very hard. With a big sigh, TG wearily bent down to pick up his pencil. Giggling, Henry stretched out his leg, edging the pencil just out of TG's reach, then pressed his foot down hard on TG's hand. Nasty boy. The familiar tingle started in TG's head, and his ears began to get hot. He knew what he should do, as his mother always suggested. Count to 10, breathe deeply, and just ignore Henry. But before he knew it, he had stood up and pushed Henry backwards. Over went the chair, and Henry followed it, banging his head with a loud thunk on the floor. Henry let out an enormous howl. The teacher, Mrs. Wolfbater, jumped out of her seat and flew across the room. Her hard grey eyes bored straight into T.G. "What have you done now, Terry Grant? You had better hope that poor Henry isn't seriously hurt. Go and stand outside Mr. Strictly's room, and when he asks, you tell him that Mrs. Wolfbater has had enough of you and she doesn't want you back in her room." As she shouted, some droplets of spit flew out of her mouth, landing on T.G.'s cheek. Oh, yuck! T.G. was fighting hard against the temptation to wipe it off and scream out loud in her face. All this time Henry was making rude faces at T.G. behind Mrs. Wolfbater's back and mouthing, "Didn't hurt, didn't hurt." Turning round, T.G. ran to the door. A little voice in his head warned, "Close the door quietly or you'll be in deeper trouble." But that little voice was just not strong enough. So instead, he turned and he screamed at Mrs. Wolfbater, "You are a mean old bag and I hate you!" Bang! He flung the door back as hard as he could. It hit the wall, knocking the painting down, and sprang back, shutting with an almighty crash. T.G. ran as fast as he could down the corridor, past Mr. Strictly's office and out into the playground. He ran blindly on to the very edge of the playing field and sat in a huddle on the wet grass. "It's not fair," he shouted, banging his fist on the ground. "What's not fair, T.G.?" a soft, friendly voice called from behind him. He looked up, but there was no one there. Puzzled, he put his head back down and carried on sobbing to himself, but soon the voice returned. "T.G., tell me why you're so upset." He raised his tear-stained face and asked, "Where are you?" "Here." T.G. looked around, but all he could see was an empty field and a deserted playground. Then he saw something glinting out of the corner of his eye. It was the sun shining on the puddle beside him, and strangely the voice seemed to be coming from that direction. He looked into the puddle. It was now bubbling, and a sort of rainbow colour mist was rising off it. T.G. was mesmerised. As the bubbling stopped, the mist cleared to reveal the face of a lady with kind hazel eyes and warm golden brown hair. She seemed to be going in and out of focus, so T.G. leaned forward in an effort to see her more clearly. "T.G., don't be upset. I'm here to help you, and I think you can help me too." T.G. was dumbstruck. He kept staring into the kind hazel eyes. "T.G., will you help me?" He just kept staring. "T.G., you can help me." At that moment a foot landed splash in the middle of the puddle, and the lady was gone. "Where are you? What do you want? Come back!" T.G. cried. "Get up, you stupid boy! Stop talking to yourself!" T.G. looked up into the angry face of Mrs. Wolfbater. "I told you to go to Mr. Strictly's office. This was the last time you'd disobey me, young man." As T.G. was whisked off to see the headmaster, he turned around to take a quick look back at the puddle. Hovering above it was the rainbow mist. What did that strange lady want? I hope you enjoyed that. That was the first chapter of T.G. and the Rainbow Warriors, and I'll be back to read you the second very soon. Bye.